Hi guys, it's Jana with Ada Community Library. I'm doing your cake ball tutorial this week. So we are going to make two different kinds of cake balls. One will be the chocolate chip cookie dough, the other will be German chocolate. So I've laid out everything that we're going to need to do this so that you know ahead of time what you're going to need. So first we've got our two different cakes that will make one each of our flavors. We'll do the standard recipe that's on the back of them, just like we're making a normal cake. So we've got our mixer, vegetable oil, eggs, and water. We'll mix those up, bake them, and then for the second part, we'll add in for chocolate chip cookie dough, mini chocolate chips. We'll mix up the cakes with German chocolate. We'll take the coconut pecan. The chocolate chip cookie dough, we'll use just a regular cream cheese frosting. And to do that, we'll just need a mixing bowl and just a spoon that's not going to stick. So I'm using a wooden spoon today. Once they're all mixed up, we will use a cookie scoop. I have my fancier one. You can also just use a spoon to measure out your cookie scoops. That will roll them up, and then I'll use our melting pot here to melt down our candy coating. For chocolate chip, we'll use the white candy coating, and for the German chocolate, we'll use chocolate. We'll melt them up and dip them, and then we'll end by topping them again with chocolate chips or coconut. All right, guys, we're getting ready to do the chocolate chip, to start the chocolate chip cookie dough. We are just gonna follow the recipe that's on the back of the cake mix. We just need to get our cake made and baked so that we can squish it up later. Okay, so the thing I almost always forget to do is preheat the oven. So we're gonna come here, we're gonna preheat to 350, standard recipe. And then into the cake, or into our mixer, we've got our cake mix, 3 eggs, half a cup of oil, and 1 cup of water. That's the standard for the white cake. For the German chocolate, we'll do a little bit more water. Now we're gonna mix this up for 2 minutes. I'm not gonna make you sit here for 2 minutes while I do that. And then we will pour it in the pan and get it in the oven. All right, our batter is mixed. Now we're gonna do nonstick spray, which I forgot in our overview, and our pan, but we're baking a cake, so hopefully you counted on that. So we're gonna spray our pan, make sure that we get on the sides a bit to make sure that when the cake rises, it doesn't get stuck there. In my experience, it's best to do a 9x13 pan when you're baking the cakes, just because you want to minimize the amount of edges that you have. When we're squishing the cake by hand, those edges sometimes are difficult to really mix in and like get nice and broken up. So we're gonna cut the edges off. We'll get to that later. So we're gonna get this sprayed. Done. Then we're gonna come to our mixer. You can tell we've got cake batter up on the side, so I usually like to scrape that down after shaking out the beaters, just to get as much as we can off. Now, another thing is every cake mix will tell you not to eat the batter raw, and technically I'm telling you to do that too, because there's raw eggs in here. But if you are the kind of person who likes to eat cake batter, that's fine. Just make sure that you adjust your baking time down a little bit. I know that whenever I make a cake in my house, I've got a 4-year-old and a granddaddy who like to eat a lot of my cake batter. So I usually have to cut it down by at least 5 minutes, and then we usually make fewer cake balls. So we're gonna scrape this into our pan, and then we'll get it in the oven. All right, so when we're pouring, we wanna just make sure that we're spreading the cake batter throughout the whole bottom of the pan as evenly as possible, because we don't want it to bake unevenly. And then we just use our spatula to scrape around the inside edges to get as much as we can from our bowl into the cake pan. Then once we've got it evened out a little bit, we're gonna pop it in the oven, set the timer according to the back of the box. It should be about 20 minutes, and come back and check on it. Thanks. We are about to check on our first cake. So we've opened the oven. I'm gonna pull that out. And then the way we check to see if it's done, it looks pretty brown, but we're gonna stick a toothpick in right in the middle. It comes out totally clean, no cake sticking to it, which means it's ready to come out. we'll stick it up here to cool. And then before we can do anything more with this cake, it needs to cool all the way. So cake balls aren't necessarily something that you can make really quickly. This is gonna have to cool before we can squish it, otherwise it's gonna melt the icing. So we'll let this one cool while we bake our chocolate cake. All right, so now that your cake is cooled, we talked about the fact that like this isn't necessarily a fast process. So we're later in the day, the cake was cooled down. Before we start mashing this and combining it with the rest of our ingredients, we want to start the candy coating melting, because that can take a little while. So we're going to turn our pot on and we set it up to the highest setting, and then we will put in these bricks. Usually you can put in like of the whole thing comes with about a dozen of these little squares. You're probably going to want to put in at least half of them. Another trick that you can use is if you have Crisco, which is just shortening, you can add in about a tablespoon of this to help thin out your chocolate. It helps it to cool a little bit faster once you have it on the cake balls, and just thins it out so that it kind of coats more smoothly. So while this is melting, we talked about the edges of your cake get a little bit harder. So I just take a knife and cut right along this seam, right along the edges, just to take out the very, very edge. So we'll work our way all the way around. And then we'll get our mixing bowl over here. That'll take off the hardest parts of the cake. We'll get our mixing bowl and we will start to move cake. Okay, so I like to just cut this so it's a little bit easier to move. It doesn't really matter the size of your sections. It's all going in this bowl except for the outer edge that we cut off. Okay, so once you've got all the cake in here that you're going to use, you can move this aside. We're done with that. You're just going to use the back of the spoon to start mixing, kind of smushing against the side. And then, so you'll do kind of like jabbing at it with the top of your spoon and pressing it to break it up with the back of your spoon. And you just keep going. It'll start to kind of crumble, of course, because you're smushing it. Keep going until it's kind of a nice crumbled consistency. Like, clearly I'm not done. I've still got lots of chunks in here. And you want it as kind of uniform as possible, just because you don't want to find a giant clump of cake in a cake ball that's supposed to be all nice and one kind of texture. All right, so now that we've got our cake crumbled to a good consistency, we're gonna get out our cream cheese frosting. Again, the brand does not matter, choose whatever you want. Generally, it's gonna be, about a third of the frosting. And for me, because I don't care what this looks like when it sits in my fridge until the next time I make cake balls, I always just tear it off so that you can see the whole tub. And then I just use a Sharpie to mark off about a third and a third for my next time. That way it's easy to know when you're scooping about where you're aiming for. So, especially if you did not take our recommendation and you ate some of your cake mix or your cake batter, you want to add this in kind of gradually just to make sure, because like a third of the cake or a third of the frosting is if you do a full cake. So if you've eaten some of your cake batter, you're not going to have a full thing, and you don't want it to be too mushy. Otherwise, it's just kind of weird and gross when you eat it. I mean, it'll be fine. It's all sugar. It tastes delicious, but still. So we're going to add this in. And the best way to test it for its consistency, like right now I can tell I still have some chunks and stuff in here. But afterward, like once you think that you might be at the good spot, to finish mixing, you can just take a little bit and squish it and see if it holds its shape very well. That one's looking pretty good. We'll finish mixing this in. I'm going to use my cookie scoop because we're going to use this in a moment, just to scrape off this extra frosting, just to make sure that we get all of that mixed in really well. Of course, now it doesn't want to come out of our cookie scoop because frosting is clingy like that. All right, so this is looking pretty good. Now that we have this at a good consistency, we're gonna add in some chocolate chips. And this one is a inexact science. Add until it looks delicious to you. Some people like lots of chocolate chips, some people not so much. All right, and then we just mix it in. It's okay if it's not like sticking in there really well. They'll stay once we ball them up. But again, like if we get to this and you feel like it's just not quite sticking as much as you'd like it to, we can add in a little bit more. And I think I will, because there's some on the edges here of our 1/3 line. Best to do that with a clean spoon. Probably should have done that. Now I have cake mix and the rest of my icing. Okay, so we've got our cake ready to go. We've got our candy coating nice and melted now. It's a good consistency. Like you can tell, it's nice and drippy. No chunks in there. So the next step is we're gonna use our cookie scoop. And again, this is about a tablespoon worth of cake that we're gonna scoop. So if you don't have a cookie scoop at home, that's how you can measure. So we just take it, we press it against the side of the pan to get it nice and even. We'll take it out into our hand, we'll squish it, and we roll it just like you did when you were a kid with your Play-Doh. So we get it into a nice ball. You put a little pressure because you don't want it to be crumbly anymore. You want to get it nice and smooth so that it doesn't have any rough edges once you dip it. You can do several of these at once, or you can just do them one at a time. I am apparently bad at making lists because I forgot one thing in our overview. When you're dipping them, once they come out of the chocolate, you want to be able to get them off of your surface easily. So I'm using parchment paper. You can also use a silicone mat or even wax paper, just anything that it's not going to stick to very hard. So we're going to dip this in. We cover it up with our spoon, and then we just kind of fish it back out. I give it a little wiggle and then scrape off the bottom, holding the cake ball kind of towards the edge of the spoon. And then you just come and roll it off so that it's nice. You'll grab some more of your mini chocolate chips, just a couple, drop them on the top there. You don't want to do what I just did, which is to get it too far and then it falls down the side. So sometimes it's good even to wait a little while so that it's just a tiny bit drier, and then you can put your topping on. One thing that I did forget to mention is this candy coating sometimes can be difficult to find. It's also called almond bark, depending on where you're shopping. The places that I found that you can get it almost all year round is Albertsons. That's where I got this one, these ones. Walmart also has it, but I think there they do call it almond bark. But they're just in your baking aisle and you can ask for it. Okay, let's see. Let's do one more of these just so that you guys can really see it. So again, we just scoop it out, we roll it up, get it nice and smooth. Sometimes you shape it afterward if it kind of comes out a little wonky, more like a snake than a ball or something, you know. Drop it in. Again, like you're not throwing it in there, you're just dropping it, so you don't want to lose it in the candy coating. We'll give it a wiggle, scrape off the bottom, and bring it down. Should roll off pretty nice. You're really trying to just kind of like scooch it off because you don't want to roll it or you'll have gaps from where the spoon laid on it. Drop a couple of those on. And that is how you're going to do the rest of the batter for the chocolate chip cookie dough cake ball. Next, we'll show you what to do with the German chocolate. All right, so we went ahead and finished, you know, through internet and cell phone pausing magic, all the rest of our chocolate chip cookie cake balls. Now, the way that you'll be able to tell if these are done drying or not, because the candy coating has to harden, they'll get a little bit more matte color, like flat, instead of being shiny and wet. The foolproof method, of course, is to just touch it. So, see, like this one, you may not be able to see this, but like if your finger leaves a little bit of a peak on it, like on the side of that one there where I touched it, clearly it's not ready yet because it's sticking to my finger. So just let them cool off. Then you can move them out into whatever dish you're going to use to transport them wherever you're going, or, you know, to your belly, because they're delicious. That's the point. Okay, so now the German chocolate ones. We've mashed up the cake. This one, the frosting is a little bit different. So we're using the coconut pecan frosting. And on this one, you're going to use about half of it. Just the consistency and the texture of this one needs a little bit more to get your cake balls to where you want them to be. So we'll do the same thing. We scoop against the side to get it a little flat to make sure that we are getting consistent size of cake balls here. And then we're gonna come and dip it in the regular chocolate candy coating. So I realize that you guys might not all have a candy pot because you might not make cake balls like all the time, like me. That's okay. So if you don't have a pot like this, but you still need to get this chocolate melted, you can try it on the stovetop, just on a very low setting. You could also get a microwave safe bowl, so like a nice big glass dish, and microwave it in the microwave in 30-second increments, just making sure, like once it starts getting more melted, then you stir it, as you're doing it, every 30 seconds, you're stirring it in between. Once it starts to get melted enough, you're going to do it in smaller increments, like 10 seconds, just to make sure that you're not getting the candy coating burnt by microwaving it. And then you'll be able to dip, and once it starts hardening, you can melt it for a little bit longer again. All right, with these ones, same as our other ones, we drop it in. We're going to cover it up with our spoon, give it a wiggle, scrape off the bottom and let it come off the spoon. And then these ones, we are gonna coat with, or we're gonna top with coconut. So just shaved coconut to match the icing. And that is the German chocolate cake ball. So I hope you guys have fun making these treats at home, and we'll see you around.